see the...
Yeah. You just take your time to log in.
Can... Okay. Hello, hello. My name is Teacher Judith. Today is noon right now, so hopefully I'm catching you on your lunch break. But today we'll be going through a book. Obviously, you can see on my screen, which is one of my favorite books growing up. That will be a really fun read. So hopefully, everybody will be interested to read it with me. Okay. So this is The Sorcerer's Stone, the first book out of Harry Potter, by J.K. Rowling. Hopefully, those of you who are watching know this book, but if you don't, I will introduce it to you properly, okay? So today's book starts quite interestingly. So let's go through the first chapter together, okay? So, chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. I was going to give you a bit of an introduction, but I don't know if that would count as a spoiler, which I know a lot of people don't like, so maybe not. We will talk about it a little bit after we get through the first chapter. Okay. So, The Boy Who Lived. So, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. It's kind of interesting that they say this right off the bat, okay? So they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Here they are trying to tell us that, or this entire paragraph actually is trying to tell us that Mr. and Mrs. Dursley were the picture perfect of what a normal family should look like, okay? They are quite conscious of how they look like to the public, so they want to be seen perceived now if you don't know anything about the book, you'd be wondering why that would be the basis for anything, right? Because most people, average Joes, would be quite normal. So just keep that in mind, okay? So Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. So this part, okay, we know about Mr. Dursley. He's a big, beefy man, hardly any neck, which gives us a stark contrast to his wife. Okay, who, while Mr. Dursley, they say that he has hardly any neck, they use the analogy of Mrs. Dursley and twice his usual amount of neck. So she's someone who's probably very lanky, very tall, okay? But they use this analogy to talk about how she likes to spy on the neighbors, okay? Which speaks to her character, okay? What kind of person she might be and what kind of things she gets up to in her free time, okay? So Mr. Dursley maybe doesn't really care about gossip. His wife definitely does. We can also notice that the narrator here, right, while they've given so much description about Mr. Dursley and Mrs. Dursley, you can say that maybe he doesn't quite care about the boy, considering it says here, right, the Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. So that's all they need us to know, that the Dursley family values their son quite a lot. Okay. Hi Moonlight, welcome to the live. If at any point you would like to mention anything or pause on anything that you don't understand, please just say so in the comments, okay? I'll gladly pause and go through any section again together. Okay. I said no finer boy anywhere. Okay. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years, in fact. Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursley-ish as it was possible to be. Notice the analogies here, okay? So while the entire previous paragraph was sort of talking about the differences between Mr. and Mrs. Dursley and how fond they were of Dudley, okay? Here they are introducing Mrs. Dursley's sister and her husband as using quite unsavory language, I would say. So her good-for-nothing husband, so this is an expression that suggests that he is maybe someone unreliable, or that unreliable is maybe a good word to use here. Unreliable. What else? Also, they say un-Dursley-ish. So notice in the first paragraph we were talking about how they want to be seen as people who are very normal, very status quo, okay, of people who don't cause any trouble, who maybe can be seen as having a certain amount of status, that they are pretty well-to-do, that they want to be seen, taken seriously, basically. And so here, when they're saying as un-Dursley-ish as possible to be, they are using this description again in a negative connotation, because they're trying to show that the Potters were starkly different from them. Okay, so okay, so the Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never even seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. So this is quite specific, right? Child like that. So when they use it in such a sentence, they're trying to say that they definitely don't like the Potters, and they don't want Dudley to have anything to do with the son. Okay? Even though the son is quite small, right? But they don't care about whether he will grow up to be someone who's as fine a boy as Dudley, as they mention here, but they are quite certain that he won't be. Okay, also here a good expression that they've used is they shuddered to think. Okay, so they obviously care a lot about impressions. Okay, they care about. Oh, they care about people's opinions quite a lot. Okay, so here they say shuddered to think. They are quite afraid of what people might say if they manage to see the Potters on their street. Okay, so Mrs. Dursley and her husband are quite embarrassed to be anything closely related to the Potters at all. Okay, so let's take a look at the next page. Okay, when Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy day outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. So a lot of things happening on this morning. Okay, the language that they use here again is quite what's the word I can use? Expressive to read. Okay, while it's quite a normal Tuesday, they've mentioned, right? It's a dull grey Tuesday, much like today, I would imagine. Okay, very gloomy. Okay, they're saying that it's probably going to rain. It's quite nothing impressive, nothing new or interesting about this Tuesday here. Okay, but they're quite content. Okay, Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie. So again, the narrator wants you to know that there is nothing, even though the Dursleys want to be seen as normal, there's nothing good about being normal. Okay, it's a boring tie. Okay, but he hummed. So this suggests that he's in quite a good mood. Okay, you can say that he's maybe quite content. Okay, notice that they use this language in a way that shows he's content without telling us that he's content. So they don't have to say he hummed contentedly, for example. You know that him humming tells us that he's quite content. Okay, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley. So you can imagine the imagery of quite a tall mother. Okay, I'm sure you've seen probably on public transport if you don't have siblings at home. If you do have siblings at home, then you know quite well that she is doing her best with her screaming toddler, okay, into his high chair. And we know he's a toddler again because he's sitting specifically in a high chair. Okay, so these are all good descriptions you can use, things you can take inspiration from, especially if you're writing your compositions. Okay. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. So tawny owl is the breed of owl, okay? But they are mentioning this specifically because likely, like for example, even in Singapore, it's not very normal to see owls just out and about in our climate. So although this is obviously, this book takes place in the UK, in Surrey, yeah, it is also probably not very normal to have owls fluttering about, okay? So a large tawny owl fluttered past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. So quite normal, okay? Pecked here is a very small kiss, okay? Quick kiss rather, a small and quick kiss. Okay, tried to kiss Dudley goodbye but missed because he was now having a tantrum and throwing cereal at the wall. So we can imagine that he's quite a handful. Okay, but most of us were at this age, I suppose. Chortled, another good word to use instead of he laughed or he cackled. So each, obviously, the vocabulary we use suggests different things. So chortled here just says that he is in quite a good mood again. Okay, so laughed in a good way. Okay, and then he left. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar, a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. Okay, as Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. So again, quite a few things happening here. Okay, so first of all, another good use of word, peculiar. Okay, here just means strange. Okay, very strange, very odd, something that you don't see every day. So, and what was the thing that was strange or odd? A cat reading a map. Now, how do you even know the cat is reading the map versus just, I don't know, he just happens to be there with the map before him, right? So this is exactly what Mr. Dursley is thinking. So if you have a cat at home, maybe you should consider just watching them for a second, seeing if they're actually reading the newspaper that they are sitting with. Okay, but in this case, Mr. Dursley wanted to be sure, right? So he jerked his head around and he looked again. Okay, there was a tabby cat. So again, a breed of cat. Okay, standing on the corner. So notice this also, okay, standing on the corner. He is trying to liken them to, we wouldn't really say animals stand, right? Because cats have 4 paws and therefore they're likely to be sat or crouched, something of that effect. But instead, he's standing, okay? Standing on the corner of Privet Drive. But there wasn't a map inside. So the map had disappeared, so that's why he's considering that maybe it was a trick of the light. Okay? So this is they're trying to say that sometimes, right, when you're walking about, sometimes you see shadows in your peripheral vision, in the vision that is not immediately in front of you, right? But it doesn't mean there's something actually there. So this is what they're trying to say, right? Maybe it's the trick of the light. Maybe it can be explained by very normal things because he wants to be a normal person, correct? So Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. So he is suggesting that he's staring, looking for information, but there is no information to be found. And then he drove and watched the cat in his mirror, and it was now reading the sign. So he's quite sure now that he's watched this cat, okay? It was reading, but now he's still trying to tell himself, he's arguing with himself in his head. He's like, no, it's not reading anything, it's a cat, okay? So it's looking at the sign because cats couldn't read maps or signs. Now take note that when we talk about these things, it has to have a meaning later. It has to make sense for the later parts of the story. So they wouldn't be bringing up this information if it wasn't important to us. Because if it's, again, unimportant information, you would talk about it in one sentence and let it be. But notice that this theme of the cat maybe reading something is something that comes up quite often. Okay. So Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. And that's quite literal, right? It's the imagery of, I don't want to believe this thing, so let me just put it, let's just come back to reality and move on. So he makes sure he does that. He only thinks about work because we have established that he works with drills. Okay. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. Okay, People in cloaks. Now, can you even imagine what a cloak looks like? I feel like I only knew what a cloak was because I read this book as a child. Otherwise, in regular everyday fashion, you probably know things like jeans and jackets and things like that, right? But a cloak is something quite out there. Okay? Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes. So we can tell that strange, funny. Here he doesn't mean funny haha, okay? He means funny weird. So he's talking about funny in a way that is again odd and not normal. Okay, abnormal. Okay? The get-ups you saw on young people. And again, here it's with the exclamation mark. So he's quite disturbed by this. Okay? And the get-up here is suggesting that they're in costumes of some kind. So costumes, that they're putting on a show of some kind because he cannot understand it. He cannot fathom that they'll be dressing like this on purpose. Okay? He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. So this again tells us that he absolutely does not approve of this fashion. Okay? And here another good analogy, a good expression. Okay? A huddle of these weirdos. So instead of saying just a group of people standing, a crowd of people, it's a huddle. So it suggests that they're likely moving quite close together, and you can tell that because there's enough of them that they can stand out, okay? They are a group of these people that he's definitely paying attention to. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why? That man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him! So you can tell that by him just saying this, right? The nerve of him. It is an expression people use when they are quite annoyed and maybe are talking about the audacity, the gall of somebody to be older than he was and be wearing emerald green as an entire cloak. So a cloak is typically a very long jacket that they wear, right? So it goes down to their ankles even. So that's quite a big coat, right? You will be able to see it from anywhere if it's emerald green. So a very brilliant green. It's a very specific color. Because most people, actually not entirely true. Okay, not everybody doesn't wear color when they're older. But he's trying to suggest that people his age and older should be dressed in what is seen as normal. So maybe in their drab work attire, things like that. Okay, so the nerve of him, he's suggesting the gall, okay, the audacity. Okay, like how dare he be this age and still dress so flamboyantly, so loudly. Okay. And here he says enraged, so he's not just shocked by it. He's offended. Okay, he's angry. Okay, but then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on the drills. So again, he has managed to see all these things in front of him that are things that his mind is like, maybe this is not normal, okay? First the cat reading a map, then reading a sign, and he's like, no, they don't do that, okay? I'm going to work. Then he sees all these people in very brightly colored clothing, okay? People who are his age and older as well. And he cannot stand it, but after a while he's like, you know what, not my business, I'm just going to go to work. Okay, so this is basically his monologue, his thoughts in his head, right? These people were obviously collecting for something. So collecting for something here maybe suggests that they are asking for donations, or they are just in a theater group, something of that effect, okay? And a silly stunt. Yeah, could be like a prank, or yeah, maybe they're cosplaying or something like that. Okay. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owl swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. So gazed, open-mouthed, so you can say awestruck. Okay, they were shocked, right? We've used those expressions in our conversations before, that his mouth was wide agape, right? Things like that. They were shocked. Okay. As owl after owl sped overhead, so they were zooming past, okay, really quickly. In other words, sped, swooping, all these words suggest that they were not just flying, but they were flying really quickly. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. Okay, so again, this language is very good at, again, asserting the fact that Mr. Dursley is very normal. All he does are very normal things. And everybody should note that it is normal. And he wants to be seen as normal. So owl-free morning, he's yelling at people like he wants to, which probably suggests that he's not the very best person to have in the office. He made several important telephone calls, and he shouted a bit more. So this is very normal for him. This is his normal routine. Okay, very good mood until lunchtime, and then he took a walk to get a bun. He went for a snack. Also, yes, so earlier I was saying that owls are probably not what we see very regularly flying about. But the better part here is they've mentioned that they had never even seen an owl at nighttime, because it is widely known that owls typically only come out at night, right? But this is in the broad daylight. This is here in the middle of the day, in the middle of the day, which is why it might be odd. So several things they've already mentioned in maybe 3 or so paragraphs of all the different instances that could be strange or odd to most people. Okay. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the bakers. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This bunch were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. So this again suggests that he was expecting them to be collecting donations of some sort. Okay, it was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. So before we get there, okay, he said that it made him uneasy. So maybe a bit nervous. Nervous, uncertain, okay, maybe a little bit worried. And he didn't know why, but he was sure that it's something a bit strange. Okay, and good use of the word clutching here as well. Okay, he's not just holding the bag, he's clutching it. Because again, he's walking past them and he's feeling quite worried, right? So it's the imagery of when you are maybe carrying an undetermined sum of money in your bag and you don't want anybody to know about it, and he's literally clutching it like this. And he's ambling past them, walking past them quickly. Okay, so he's clutching a large donut in a bag that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters, that's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. Okay? He stopped dead. So this expression is usually followed up by in his tracks. Okay? But because it's quite a widely used expression, you don't have to say that. So Mr. Dursley stopped dead. So he stopped immediately without, he didn't gradually stop. He didn't come to a stop. He stopped dead, meaning he was probably walking pretty quickly, but he just stopped, standing still immediately, abruptly. Okay? And fear flooded him. So why did he stop? Because he was extremely afraid all of a sudden. Okay? He flooded his senses. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them. Okay? Now we want to know why, right? And before this, they'd actually mentioned the Potters, who we already know are related to the Dursleys. And this entire chapter so far was telling us that the Dursleys want to be normal. So does he want to know that these groups of people who he finds strange, who dresses nothing like what he does, okay, are talking about people who are related to him? Okay, he knows that this is trouble and he doesn't want anything to do with it. Okay. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. So you can tell here that he is in quite a flurry, right? He's quite, his previously very content, very calm day, his moods, okay, all of his plans have been thrown out of whack, okay? He's been disturbed quite deeply, okay? So he rushed back, okay, very quickly, hurried up to his office. He snapped at his secretary. So he, snapped is quickly and angrily. Okay, at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone. So here he grabbed his telephone and he wanted to make a phone call. Okay, almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down, stroked his moustache, thinking, no, he was being stupid. Okay, Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Okay, so they're all very normal names, so it can't be what he's thinking of. Maybe they're not related. Okay, maybe it's someone else entirely. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. Okay, this again tells us how much he really cares about the Potter family. Okay, he'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. Okay, so all these things suggest that he's basically going through what we call the 5 stages of grief, right? He's seen this thing that's happened and now he's like second guessing everything he knows. Okay, like, do I really know that person? Do I want to cause a stir at home, cause his missus more worry? Hello. I don't know what your name is, but you have a frog emoji, so I will call you a frog. Yeah. Teacher Yahweh will be going live later. Okay. Again, welcome to everybody else who's on the live. I guess I'm kind of speeding through the book. Yeah, so hopefully if you're still with us or you are interested in this book, it'll help you maybe get you a bit more accustomed to the Harry Potter series that you want to keep reading with us. This is the first book. This is Sorcerer's Stone from the Harry Potter series. So Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Yeah, so let's go on to the next page. Okay. Also, if you have any book recommendations, you could always just mention that in the chat as well. And next time, maybe we can take a look and see if these are books that we can also read on the live. Okay. how did the ending go? So there was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that, but all the same, those people in cloaks. Okay, so this is again talking about how much judgment he has, right, for Mrs. Dursley's sister. He agrees with her that and why she always gets upset. So this suggests that they probably have a very difficult relationship in some way. Okay. Yeah, all the same, these people in cloaks. Actually, before we get there, I'd actually wanted to mention something earlier. Okay. Typically, a lot of people have issues with synthesis and transformation in sentences. So this section here is a really good example of how they managed to fit so many ideas into one sentence. Okay. So it says, he dashed back across the road. Okay. Hurried up to his office. Snapped at his secretary. Seized the telephone. And had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. So many different things. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ideas in one sentence. But it was very masterfully done. Okay, just with a couple of commas, the word and then also this other transition word when, right? To connect all these ideas very well, precisely in one sentence. So again, this is not something that we will always recommend you to do if you don't know how to do well, but very good things to note and how we can use the language to do such a thing. Okay? Yeah. Yes, okay, we can continue. So, he found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. So this, again, good imagery to use because we don't want to just say that he was worried, right? But he was so worried that he walked straight into somebody. Okay, this suggests that his mind isn't focused on what he's supposed to be doing. For example, going home, okay, leaving the building at 5 o'clock on the dot. Okay, instead he's thinking about many other things, okay, of all the things that have happened this afternoon, and whether the family that the weird people in cloaks were talking about were actually his in-laws. Okay. Hello everybody who just joined the live, by the way. Again, just to know, I'm teacher Judith and we're going through Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, we are on, I think, page 15 of the first chapter. Or rather, not page 15 of the first book, sorry, not the chapter. Okay. So, next paragraph. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passersby stare, "Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you-know-who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day." Okay, so very interesting response from someone who had almost just been bumped and who could have fallen over. Okay, so again, a few things to note. Okay, he stumbled and almost fell. So this suggests that he lost his footing in some way. And Mr. Dursley was at first sorry about it, right? And because he'd bumped into the man. But now he noticed that he was wearing a violet cloak. So he was like, okay, this person is one of these weirdos in this group. Okay, and he noticed that he wasn't upset at all. So expression here that is good to use, on the contrary. Okay, that means in in contrast, okay, from what he expected. He expected him to be upset, but he was not. So on the contrary, his face split into a wide smile. So okay, this is not what he expected. Unexpectedly, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passersby stare. So he's again suggesting, again adding on to this weird outlook of them, okay? That he had a squeaky voice that's probably not what you'd hear most humans have. Okay, don't be sorry, my dear self, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who is gone. So again, a lot of new words here, okay, things that are specific to this story. You know who, okay, muggles, okay, things that we don't quite understand yet, okay. But he's telling us that it's a happy day, so we shouldn't be alarmed. Okay, and the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Now, regardless of whether he'd just been bumped into, okay, do strangers typically hug you for any reason whatsoever if you don't know them? Not quite, right? So this is again something that we can account to this weirdness, okay? He hugged Mr. Dursley. Okay, and knowing Mr. Dursley being quite a normal person, okay, who doesn't do anything out of the normal, he's probably going to be quite strange, feel quite strange about it. So Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. This is an expression that if you're in WoW, you would know this expression very well, okay? He stood rooted to the spot. He was shocked in some way, right? Okay? He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was, okay? He was rattled. So he was shaken up. Oh. Shaken up. Okay. Yeah, he was extremely shocked and disturbed by it. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. So again, very interesting use of language, of description again. He didn't approve of imagination. Can you imagine that? Okay? Yeah. Me just asking that question, I already know Mr. Dursley doesn't approve of me. Okay? He didn't approve of imagination. It's not something that you should do, that's out of the ordinary. Okay? So, again, he also doesn't know what muggle means. Okay? We'll come to that later. These are all, again, this book does introduce a lot of original and fantastical elements. So these are things that don't actually have meaning outside of this realm of events, outside of this book. Okay. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on the garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. So this suggests that, okay, he must have looked at it quite closely, or, paid particular attention to it to notice that there are markings around its eyes, right? And that it's also something that is maybe, rather than saying not normal, maybe a cat that he wouldn't normally see, okay, in the area. For example, like the block cats that you have around your house, at your HDB estate, okay, that might be something normal and you'll be quite used to seeing them, right? But this suggests that this is why he is concerned about this particular cat, okay, that is quite different. Okay, and notice that he said it didn't improve his mood, because already in the morning he was quite aware of how this cat is maybe not normal, right? And now of the events of the entire day, and now he's coming back home, and he wants desperately for everything to be normal, but again he sees this tabby cat, who he's still trying to convince himself that it wasn't reading, that it was just doing cat-like things, okay? So again, things to take note of. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Okay, A stern look, so very firm, not quite angry, but maybe in a sort of way that suggests that it's not going anywhere and cannot be told what to do. Okay. Okay. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. Okay, he entered the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. So while he had a very abnormal day, what's the word that he used in the beginning? A very un-Dursley-ish day, he did not want his wife to experience the same thing. Okay? Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems. See, notice that, again, this entire section, our narrator is talking in the point of view of Mr. Dursley. So now Mr. Dursley, we already know, does not care about things outside his family, right? He's not interested in the gossip like his wife is. So he doesn't even know what the neighbor's name is. He only knows them as Mrs. Next Door. Okay? So all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, won't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. Again, coming back to the theme of being normal. Okay? When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain whether owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newscaster allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that. But it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Okay? So even the newscasters who are usually trusted to tell us about normal things, okay, every day that everyone should know, okay, have been mentioning this, right? And if you recall earlier in the book, Mr. Dursley hadn't actually seen the owls because he was sitting with his back facing the windows. So that was the unusual bits of the day that he didn't witness, okay? But now that everybody is talking about it, he probably has some thoughts. Okay? So also interesting thing, okay? The weatherman said that they should have been expecting rain. Okay, and all these places that they're suggesting are all far away from each other. Okay, as far apart as. So, okay, they're suggesting that all these places are far from each other. So they should be having different experiences. But no, they've all had a downpour of shooting stars. So shooting stars are typically things that we see once in a blue moon. Okay, again, another expression. Okay, something we don't see often. Okay, something that it's probably most people only see in videos on the internet. But this suggests that many places in the UK have had the same phenomenon in the same night. Okay? But he said it will rain. Okay, he promises a wet night tonight. It will rain. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his chair. Again, more expressions for shock, right? He sat frozen in his chair. Shooting stars all over Britain. Owls flying by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Okay? Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. So imagine this, okay? They pretended she didn't have a sister regularly. So this suggests that they have a very strained relationship. Again, more evidence for this. So okay, which is why Mr. Dursley has been panicking, right? He's been worried all day and he didn't want to tell anything about things that could be possibly or uncertainly related to that family, to the Potters, to his in-laws. And so he didn't want to have to tell her anything, but now it's gotten quite out of hand, right? Now he realizes that even the news is talking about it, so it's not something he can ignore or pretend that was the trick of the light, okay? That he maybe only saw or glimpse of, or maybe things that he can explain away. It's no longer the case because even the weather people have talked about it. Okay? And now she is shocked and angry, which is what he had expected. So this also, while this entire thing tells us that Mrs. Dursley has a strained relationship with her sister, okay, it also tells us that some interesting things about Mr. Dursley and Mrs. Dursley's relationship, right? That they actually get on they get along very well. And Mr. Dursley knows her very well, right? So we can also keep that in mind, okay? This suggests, this will come into play later as we talk about family dynamics and things like that, which is a very central theme in this book. Okay. Also just good information to take note of, again, when you're writing your stories or even creatively outside of compositions, okay? These are all elements that make for a very cohesive, a very wholesome, a very holistic story that people will be interested to keep reading. Okay. Now where are we? Oh. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny-looking people in town today. So, snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her crowd. So the use of italics here also tells us that it's about somebody specific, right? Her crowd. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said, as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. Oh, okay. Also a good word. This is, you could use in place of stern as well. So this suggests that she's not interested in this conversation. She's wondering why he is even making commentary about her sister and his son, because she doesn't want to hear about it. Okay. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Okay, when you say your heart is sinking, okay, it suggests that his worry has a reason, right? That the worry that he had been feeling this whole time is definitely getting worse. This is exactly what I didn't want to happen, okay? So, worsening worry. Oh, hopefully y'all can see my curly whirly handwriting, okay? Worsening worry, okay? Yes, I quite agree. So now, earlier he considered maybe telling his wife about all these things that are happening, and now he's like, okay, you know what? I've tested the waters and I realized that she's not ready to hear any of these things, and I'm not going to do so. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. So now this is again good, what's the word we should use here? Notice how the narrator is feeding us very itty bitty pieces of information, that they're all quite disjointed. Again, they've used terms like muggle, okay, they talked about you know who, now they have mentioned this, okay, related to a pair of, but they didn't continue, okay, so they didn't tell us exactly what pair of what, okay, they want the reader to keep reading to figure it out, okay, I mean, now we are hooked, now we're interested, now we want to know why the Potters are so interesting, why they're so weird or so out there, okay. Also, the theme has been continuous, right, so far. Him constantly saying things like, oh, you shouldn't be imagining things. He doesn't approve of imagination, and now he's wondering, was he imagining things? Okay. Also, other good language that was used, he crept to the bedroom. Okay, he crept into the bedroom and he peered down. So instead of saying simple things like, he walked to the bedroom, he looked down in the front garden. Okay, this tells us information about how he's doing such things. So he crept, he did so quietly. He wanted to make sure that nobody could hear him, okay? And he peered down into the front garden. So he was sort of looking in a way that hopefully nobody else could see him looking, okay? And the cat was still there. And now, earlier he'd said, okay, the cat cannot be reading, cannot be standing, cannot be doing all these things. But now he's like, okay, maybe it's waiting for something. And that's a very strange feeling to have for a cat, right? Or rather, these are very human-like qualities that he's tagging onto this cat, and he hates it. He hates that he feels that way. Because again, he's very normal, so he doesn't think cats should be having these this kind of behavior. Okay. What else? The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. So turning it over in his mind suggests that he was thinking very deeply, right? He was going through the effects of the day. So he was okay. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. So this is what he comforted himself with, okay? He soothed himself to make himself feel better enough that he could fall asleep. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. Okay, so notice that he's talking about them and their kind. So again, this speaks to all these strange little things that this chapter has been setting us up for. Okay, so we know that something important is supposed to be revealed, or something earth-shattering, something that is so otherworldly that we cannot explain it. Okay, that is why he and Petunia, his wife, are so disturbed by this. Okay, so it couldn't affect them. So now, us as readers want to know what is this thing? Okay, could we be affected by? What could the Dursleys be affected by? How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when its car door slammed on the next street, nor when two owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. So this cat has been sitting there for a long, long time, right? He's seen it since the day start, okay? Now it's well into sleep time and the cat is still there, okay? Showing no signs of sleepiness, okay? Which is again very odd for a cat, because if you know anything about cats, they typically sleep for at least 20 hours in a day, okay? So if the cat is there, okay, frightened or shocked or waiting for something, okay, it's doing so on purpose. Okay, so it's setting us up with this imagery of this cat. Its eyes fixed unblinkingly. Okay, so it was extremely focused. It was typically when you don't blink, or if you're extremely focused on something, you want to make sure you don't miss anything, right? So he sat on the far corner of Privet Drive and he's waiting for something. So maybe Mr. Dursley was right. Okay. It didn't so much as quiver. So this is another word for shake or tremble or flinch. Okay, flinch is the best word. So when a car door slammed. I don't know about you and cats, but I know I get very jumpy and very randomly loud noises. So typically cats would, right? But again, in this scenario, in this instance, this cat is again acting very strangely. Okay, and we here also know that there are still more owls about. Okay, 2 owls swooped overhead. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently, you would have thought he'd just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Okay, when we talk about eyes narrowing, it's typically, you could sometimes say in anticipation, but typically if your eyes narrow, it's an expression they use to say when people are either very focused or maybe unhappy about something, okay? Maybe doing so in scrutiny, okay? To scrutinize. Okay? To look closely. Okay? And its tail twitched, so this suggests that it was interested. Okay? Maybe this is the thing that it was waiting for all day. Okay? This man appeared in the corner so silently and so suddenly that you'd have thought he'd just popped out of the ground. So again, we could not have expected it. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. So this is the first time we hear a name outside the Potters, the Dursleys, okay, that they've given again a paragraph of information about. So this person is important to our story, okay. A lot of very interesting descriptions, okay. So they set the scene. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. So this suggests that he's nothing that close to normal, right? He's extremely different, okay. He was tall, thin, very old, silver of his hair and beard. So this suggests that this adds to the imagery of him being old, because we can just say that people are old and thin, but it doesn't tell us anything about what they look like, right? We can just expect that maybe they have age lines. But he has this head of silver hair and a very long beard that were long enough to tuck into his belt. Now that is probably not a normal thing to see, right? That people are walking around with beards long enough that can be tucked into your belt at your waist, okay? Very, very different things. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak, again, adding to the things we know about the weird people Mr. Dursley has seen all day, okay? So they're wearing emerald green, violet, those are the kinds of colors that we're talking about. So a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. I don't know about you, but I definitely know that I don't know any old people, or men here especially, okay, who wear high-heeled buckled boots with cloaks. So this again talks about him being very different. Okay, his blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles. And then he's got a long crooked nose. Yes. Okay. So all these things add to the magical, mystical feel of the people in this book. Okay. So we'll know more about, we want to know more about this Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." So now we know that, okay, him chuckling and muttering suggests muttering is under his breath, right? He's speaking quietly. Okay, usually to himself. He chuckled again, he feels good about the situation, right? It adds to his amusement. I should have known, which means he recognizes this specific cat. Okay, so now the entire story so far has been Mr. Dursley being very weirded out by this cat, but of all people, Albus Dumbledore recognizes this cat. Okay, other good words used here, he rummaged in his cloak. Okay, he didn't just look for something, he didn't just pull something out of his cloak. He was looking for a long time, he was trying to find. So rummaging suggests that it was hard to find. Okay, or that maybe there were a lot of things in his pocket that he was trying to find. Okay, also that they already tell us that he was unwelcome. Everything about him, from his name to his boots, was unwelcome. Because again, it doesn't fit the picture of normal. Okay. He found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer, until the only lights left on the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. Okay, so this entire thing is talking about this very strange device, right? Again, another strange thing. This put-outer, okay, he clicked it 12 times and managed to remove all the lights from the street lamps, okay? Now it's again hard to imagine such a thing because it's a concept that is so otherworldly, okay? But very, very interesting to think about because again, these are things that are not normal, right? So now the street is dark except for 2 pinpricks. Now typically if you think of a pin, for example, like a safety pin or even like a, it's very thin, very small. So when he's saying 2 tiny pinpricks, this is suggesting that it's only very small, very tiny bits of light. Okay, and that's the only thing that we know. So that's how dark the street was. Okay, again, good words to use. Which were the eyes of a cat watching him. Okay, if anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement because of how dark it was. Okay, beady-eyed suggests that, again, because we know she's someone who is very nosy, right? And someone who is always looking out for this gossip. So this will be something that will be interesting to her, right? Something that she'd want to read about or see had it been daylight. But luckily, she's asleep. Okay. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off down the street toward number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment, he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Miss Professor McGonagall." Okay, so now we have our second character. Let me use another color. Okay, second interesting character, Professor McGonagall. Now the cat has a name, right? Don't you think it's such an interesting name for a cat? Instead of just being like a Snowy or or something similar. Okay, so now we know that this cat has a name and they are important. Okay, another expression here. Okay, he set off down the street. Okay, he took off down the street. All these things are expressions to say that he walked down the street. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. So now we know this cat wasn't actually a cat, and maybe Mr. Dursley was actually on the right track, right? This cat was actually a person. Okay? So now it says here the shape of the markings were the same as the square glasses. So can you imagine, okay, a cat with this shape on its face? Quite interesting, right? It's not something that we would see all the time. Okay? Okay, this is my interpretation of what Professor McGonagall looked like as a cat. Okay, so with her square glasses, she was smiling, but here we say she is a rather severe looking woman. Okay, and her hair was drawn into a tight bun. So these are all good expressions and imagery to use to show that she's probably someone who doesn't like to be trifled with, that wants to be taken seriously, that if she's called Professor McGonagall, right, she's probably someone with status, someone who is quite intelligent, someone who is, of status, someone with authority to some degree. Okay, so severe looking woman drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. Ruffled here suggests disturbed, okay, but it can be of many things. So if you say someone is, she looked distinctly ruffled, can be two things. One could be her physical appearance. For example, if you had been playing soccer all day, right? When you finish the game, okay, your clothes are probably slightly in a mess. They are not as neat and tidy as you would in the morning at school. Okay, so ruffled in that manner. Or if you're using the word ruffled as her demeanor, as her how she's feeling, it could be that she's disturbed or unhappy or uncertain in some way. Okay? And distinctly, so this suggests that it's maybe not normal to her, or that it is particular and that you can see it very clearly. Okay? "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly." So we know that she's been sitting there, the cat, all day, right? She didn't move. She only moved when her tail twitched because Albus Dumbledore had arrived. Okay? "So you'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh yes, everyone's celebrating, all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful. But no, even the muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He never had much sense." Okay, again another name that is quite interesting. Okay, all of these names are all, not names that we see every day. So this adds to this strangeness. Again, they use the name Muggle. Okay, this is again suggesting that there are a lot of big secrets here, right, that are slowly being revealed to us, and she's not happy about it. So it says she jerked her head back. So this suggests that she's gesturing with her head. For example, if someone says, "Shall we go?" and then you do it like this, right? You say, "Let's go this way." So she jerked her head back, okay, gesturing to the house behind them. Okay, and jerked suggests that it is a quick movement and not something that's gradual or gentle. Okay, she said impatiently, so again, this suggests that she's unhappy. Okay, maybe a bit worried, a little bit uncertain about this thing that we don't know about at all, actually, because it says you'd think they'd be more careful. Okay, so she obviously has her opinions about this. Okay, but Dumbledore has also said that people are celebrating for good reason. Okay, and this also suggests what they think about these muggles. Okay, they're not completely stupid. So this suggests that the muggles don't know a lot about their kind, as what Mr. Dursley mentioned before. Okay, and notice that even the muggles have noticed something going on. It was on their news, but the news that we were looking at was Mr. Dursley watching the television, right? So here we can kind of make sense of this, that the muggles are probably the humans they're talking about, but we don't know for sure just yet. This is something that, again, will come into play later, but this is what this paragraph is suggesting. Okay? You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. So again, there's something big that's been going on, okay? And now they're finally celebrating after 11 years. So he's empathizing. We can tell that Dumbledore is someone who empathizes with the muggles here. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumors. So she agrees with him, but again, she's still quite upset, right? She's a bit mad about it. There's no reason to lose our heads. So this good expression, okay, to say, let's not celebrate too hard that we forget about how cautious we need to be. Okay, let's not lose our train of thought. Okay, we should still be careful to some way. Okay, I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. There's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless. Okay, that means they're not just being a little bit careless or maybe they're doing things ignorantly, but downright careless. So they are almost deliberately, they're doing it, they're going too far to the extreme. So you can be careless once or twice, but to this degree it's on purpose, is what she's trying to say. Okay, so out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumors. So she is not happy about this turn of events, okay, and she's saying that they shouldn't be acting this way, no matter how happy they are. She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something. But he didn't, so she went on. A fine thing it would be if, on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared last, the muggles found out about us all. So again, us, you-know-who muggles, all things that are, all concepts that we're still not sure about, but all are important, okay? I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop. They're kind of muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. So notice this tells us a lot about their character, right? So earlier in the previous page, we know that Professor McGonagall has a very tight bun. Okay, she's a very severe-looking woman. Again, we discussed this, saying that it shows that she wants to be taken seriously. She's got, authority. But here, with the way she is talking to Albus Dumbledore, we can actually see that she respects him to some degree, and she wants his opinions to make sense, right? That's why she's a little bit upset about it. She's not talking down to him. She is basically having an exchange, okay? And here, she was hoping he was going to tell her something, okay? So he obviously has more information than she does, okay? And she knows this, but he's not divulging anything. He's not revealing anything, information. Okay, And then he's now talking about a sweet, while she just went on this whole spiel, okay, this little, maybe you could call it a rant, right? So that of all the things that have been going wrong today, even though there have been celebrations, but he's just like, well, we should celebrate. Would you like the sweet? Okay? Basically telling her to just, just for the moment, calm down a little bit. And she's offended. She's not happy about it because she says, no, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly. Okay, she's not happy about this at all. As though she didn't think this was a moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you know who has gone. Okay, but he cuts her off. He says, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. So now we have the identity of you-know-who. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. Okay? Here, she flinches, right? And this tells us how she feels about this name. Okay? You can say that she's scared, okay, concerned, any and all of these feelings, because it's again not quite a normal reaction to have. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you know. All right. Voldemort was frightened of. So this tells us a bit more about Dumbledore. We don't know anything about him except that she respects him, and now we know that this Voldemort, this mysterious Voldemort, was very afraid of Dumbledore. So he is obviously someone who has, again, status, okay? So, again, we here know about how she feels about Dumbledore as well. Half exasperated, half admiring. Okay? She thinks he's being ridiculous to a degree, but she also knows that he can be that way because he has this effect on this Voldemort. Okay, Voldemort is scared of him, and she's saying here that that Voldemort is not scared of anybody else. Okay? You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I will never have. Only because you're too, noble to use them. So this suggests that she thinks that Dumbledore is very powerful. Okay, it's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Okay, again another character that we can assume is someone they both know because he's mentioning her by name. Okay, and he's feeling quite flattered by all these things that she's saying, although they're quite, in a way, frightening, right? Talking about power, things like that, but he's quite happy about it. Okay, Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, the owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying? About why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him? So again, this is giving us more questions to ask as we're reading. Okay, we don't know anything about Voldemort, but these are, even these people who are in the strange group also don't know what's going on. Okay, they only know rumors. And the sharp look she shoots him is because she knows that he's trying to be funny, he's making light of the situation, but she is not interested, right? She still wants to know. She wants to know the information that Dumbledore is not telling her. It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. Okay, that means she's never been this forward with him. But now she cannot take it any longer. She needs to know. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop and did not answer. So again, two very different opinions and positions. Okay, Dumbledore has the information, but he doesn't care to share it. He just wants to enjoy his sweets. He's having a very grand old night in this privet drive. But Professor McGonagall is the one who's hanging on his every word, who's really anxious, who wants to know this information that Dumbledore has. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. Okay? He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are that they're dead. So now this tells us the final piece of the puzzle today. Okay? Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. So she took his reaction, okay, his bowing his head, as confirmation. Okay? She gasped because she realized that it's true. It's no longer just a rumor that's been flying around. Lily and James. I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Oh. Yeah. It is 1:30, so I suppose we will stop here for today. Okay, I think we just have a couple more pages to the end of the chapter. But we've learned quite a lot of things, okay, and quite a lot of good use of language. A lot of different expressions for how you can display someone in shock, okay? Very well demonstrated by Mr. Dursley in this book. But hopefully you've been quite engaged or maybe quite interested in this book. If you'd like to keep reading, please do. Okay, I will still be here next week continuing the book. Yeah. But for now, thank you for joining us. Okay, we'll still be having more live sessions, I think in an hour's time-ish. I'll be going through paper 2 for one of the P6 prelim papers from previous years. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, everyone who is here. Okay, we'll catch you later.